Senator Royce West, Senator Nathan Johnson, Senator Menendez, who heads the Senate Hispanic Caucus and will speak here shortly. And we're waiting on Representative Gonzales, who walked in just on cue, representing the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus. I'm State Senator Jose Rodriguez, Chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. I'm going to say a few words, and then I'm going to start turning it over to our other speakers, starting with Senator Menendez. It should be obvious now more than ever that this is not about public safety, national security, or any other nonsense used to justify Senate Resolution 535 and the years of consistent misrepresentation of immigrants and the border. Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz have gone all in on the president's re-election theme, which appears to be Make America Scared Again. Senate Resolution 535 has no force of law. It's full of inaccuracies and couldn't get a unanimous vote in the Senate. Even Congress, on a bipartisan basis, rebuked the president's attempted emergency declaration. You may hear some complaining that Democrats don't support border enforcement. That's just silly. I prosecuted drug smugglers as county attorney for many years, almost 20 years, and the Border Patrol has grown under both Republican and Democratic administrations. In fact, now they're complaining about asylum laws when they spent the last decade blocking any reform attempts, and all Congress has done now is grow the border security system. The issue we face now, ladies and gentlemen, is a fundamental issue of humanity. Migrants who have credible fear because of their governments, crime and gangs, and instability from climate change are making a difficult journey north to seek refuge. We need policies and agencies equipped to handle the reality, not the paranoid fantasy of Trump and his Texas enablers. Yet, with Senate Resolution 535, the Republicans in the Texas Senate didn't even attempt to address that. Instead, they tied up the Senate for a campaign statement, putting it on our desk minutes before calling it for a vote, with no notice to Democratic senators who actually represent the border like myself, and no public hearings, no respect for Senate traditions. We offered multiple amendments, but only one was passed, that the federal government keep families together and treat immigrants humanely. It's sad that we had to amend onto that resolution instead of it being part of the thinking that went into the Senate Resolution 535 in the first place, but I'm glad that we forced them to do it. I wonder how much of that you will hear from them at their press conference later today. But that's okay. We're here to set the record straight. Next, I'd like to introduce Senator Menendez, who chairs the Senate Hispanic Caucus. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, if you look at every one of the senators here, we represent 1 million different constituents in the state of Texas. And if you think about it, all 12 Democrats, that's 12 million Texans, almost half of the state's population. What a disgrace that we were not asked to even have any kind of input, that it was dropped on our desk right minutes before they wanted us to vote on it. You know, just like Senator Rodriguez mentioned, we all believe in having a strong border, but we also believe in having a humanitarian policy. And what is so hypocritical about the president's stance on this is, how can we have the foreign policy that we have towards Cuba, where if a refugee arrives and lands on the beaches of the United States, they're automatically granted asylum and refugee status? Why is it that they can be respected and they can be treated as a humanitarian crisis and refugee status, but people escaping, fearing for their lives with their children from Central America, from Honduras, from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, where people are being, gangs have taken over, they're not literally, their fear is not real? This is a hypocrisy that we have here in this United States policy, and we just don't stand for it. And maybe that's why they didn't want to hear our voice. And so I want to tell you, as the chair of the Senate Hispanic Caucus, I'm very proud to stand with leaders, giants in the Senate here behind me, and I'm about to introduce Senator Royce West, a member of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, who said, I want to be a part of this. This is a Texas issue. This is not an Hispanic issue. It's not just a border issue. It's a Texas issue. And that's why I'm so proud of all my colleagues, because we stood firm and we said, no, we will not be a part of this charade. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend and Senator from Dallas, Royce West.
I want to say good afternoon. If for some reason my voice starts to break, it's because I have allergies. You know, I guess we know that this is a very divisive issue in this country and also in this state. And I guess we can continue to say my side, the left and the right, as opposed to deal with the issue. I have never known an issue in the state of Texas that when people of goodwill come together, that they can't resolve. I've never known of an issue that Democrats and Republicans can't come together and solve. I've never known of an issue where Democrats didn't have good ideas and Republicans didn't have good ideas. What I do know now is that Democrats and Republicans can't sit down at our nation capital in order to get this done. You know, people in America, more specifically in the state of Texas, wants to see something done. Yes, we've seen the news reports of persons coming to our board. Do we have an issue? Yes, we do have an issue. Does it need to be resolved? Yes, it does need to be resolved. But separating families, saying that we're sending people to sanctuary cities, is that solving the problem? No. The reality is that I would encourage the President, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader in the Senate to come together, put their best foot forward, put all the issues on the table, figure out what you agree to, and figure out what your disagreements are, and then figure out how to work through your disagreements. All of us profess to be leaders in this country, in this state. Then we should act like leaders and quit acting like children and get something done.
Thank you, Senator West. I'd like to call next on Representative Mary Gonzales, Vice Chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus.
Thank you, Senator. Right now, there are thousands of children who are still in detention centers in our state. In El Paso, there is conversations about building another tent city, something we have experienced over the last year, to house thousands of migrant families. Now more than ever, our state needs leadership. And sadly and unfortunately, in a moment of humanitarian crisis, instead of being the leaders that our people deserve, and when I say our people, I mean Texans, instead of being that leader, unfortunately, the Senate leadership has decided to push forward with Senate Resolution 35. Yes? 535. I represent El Paso, Texas, a community that I so humbly serve. And El Paso has known for having a history and culture of opening its hearts and its arms to families, particularly those in need, and particularly those right now who are fleeing violence across the border. And so rather than demonizing these families and threatening a border wall and economically punishing our border communities and hurting the Texas economy with the threats of shutting down our border, we need our state leaders to unite, to not fall into the partisan rhetoric and to fight for Texans, because last week's tactics only promote more hate instead of working on the issues that we promised our communities that we would fight for and work on. Our neighborhood schools are in desperate need of improved funding and teachers that they deserve, but instead, this is what we're talking about: building a wall, encouraging hate, not truly addressing the needs of our state. This is more of the dangerous policies that we heard during the campaign season. And I would like to thank our senators for standing up against this hate. I also want to thank the congressman for being here. I truly believe that together we can fight back against this rhetoric that is not just problematic but dangerous. And with that, I now introduce my really good friend and mentor, Congressman Joaquin Castro.
Mary, don't ever do anything bad, because now you just said I'm your mentor. So
I never do anything bad.
I'm Joaquin Castro, Congressman for San Antonio and also chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. And first, I want to thank the Senate Democratic Caucus for convening us today, and the senators who are here. Also to Mary and Carol, our representatives, of course, Richard Raymond, who represents Laredo. I think all of us agree that there is a very deep humanitarian situation on the U.S.-Mexico border, including on the Texas-Mexico border. Over the last few years, several 100,000, if not more than 1 million, asylum seekers and refugees have come to our border seeking asylum from gang violence, from threats to their lives, from very desperate situations in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. To put that in context, right now, there are about 70 million people around the world who are displaced from their homes. As you all know, over the last few years, Europe has faced a migration crisis of its own, having the most migrants and asylees since World War II. So this is not something that's particular to Texas or even the United States. This is a situation that is going on around the world. And so we agree that there is a humanitarian situation. But we also believe that Senate Resolution 535 plays right into Donald Trump's hands, that it gives him cover, and that it is complicit in doing a few things. Number one, in encouraging him to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border. The president is anxious to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border. That would be disastrous for Texas businesses. Not only our border communities, but also in hometowns like mine in San Antonio, in Dallas, in Houston, throughout our state. Our state does more trade than any other state in the nation with Mexico. It would be a disaster if President Trump shut down the U.S.-Mexico border, and Senate Resolution 535, unfortunately, is complicit in that, and as I see it, encourages that of the president. The second part is that the president has, over the last few years, taken very harsh policies, very brutal policies, of separating children from parents, including infants from their mothers. Just yesterday, the Attorney General announced that he wants to hold refugees with no bond at all, hold them indefinitely. Yet this resolution doesn't adequately address the humanitarian issues at stake. Acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, McAleenan, I believe is in Texas today. I would encourage are too afraid of President Trump to stand up to the president and to stand up for Texas. And so hundreds of miles of Texas land and property are going to be taken. Little kids are separated from their parents, and our senators hardly say a word. The U.S.-Mexico border could be shut down, and the response so far from our senators has been very feeble and weak. Reports of phone calls or saying, pretty please don't do this. That's simply not enough for what's at stake for the people of Texas. And so I hope that the Senate here, the state Senate, will rethink its action. I don't think it's just a Senate resolution, not a House resolution. So I hope that the House here doesn't follow along. But it's clear that we need stronger leadership in this state to stand up when the president or anyone else in Washington tries to mess with Texas. And we're simply not getting that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I want to call on Senator Nathan Johnson from Dallas.
I don't have much to add to the eloquent comments of the people who've spoken before me. I just want to offer a thought from the perspective of a freshman senator. Our congressman mentioned that this is just a Senate resolution, and it's the idea of it being a Senate resolution that bothers me the most. There was a statement made to the United States of America that the Texas Senate passed this resolution. And 12 members of a 31-member body had never seen the resolution that passed and had virtually no input into its process. So to represent to the nation that this is the Texan will is an embarrassment. And I think it profanes the whole idea of a resolution. We pass resolutions all session long, and almost all of them are 31-0 because they reflect our collective will. This did not. It's a genuine issue for which there is genuine concern among all 31 senators. But things that can be done are not those things that were listed exclusively, and many of the things that were put into that resolution were simply inflammatory political nonsense. There are the main reason that we have a problem at the border is because people are coming here. And this entire resolution ignored the fact that in countries where President Trump has decided no longer put nation-building funds in there, the most desperate people in this hemisphere, that's something that we should address. It's missing from the resolution. There are, how many amendments did we offer? I don't know, a couple dozen? Over hours? None of them made their way in there. Had some of those amendments been incorporated, you may not have had a 31-0 vote. You might have still had a straight party line vote, but at least it would represent the voice of the collective body. So it's disappointing to me to see this body use that instrument in a way that it was never meant to be used for. And I hope it doesn't happen again, and I hope the state can recognize that this was an aberration.
Yeah.
I hope we never do anything like this again. And I hope that we can correct it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Thank you all for speaking. We're going to open it up for questions, but as you all know, we have limited time in this room because there's another group coming in. We have, 10 minutes until 3:30 when we reserve the place. So anybody got any questions?
Senator, you're all talking about unity and the need to come together, but like you just said, in this very room in 30 minutes, there's going to be a press conference opposing exactly what you're saying. Is there any common ground? Can you even agree on what the crisis is on the border? And are you working behind the scenes to find the unity that you're calling for? Or is it just, this is what we have to press?
Unfortunately, this is what we have this is reflective of what happened on the Senate floor with regard to the resolution. There is no agreement. As much as we try to reason with our colleagues about what's happening in the border, what are the real conditions in the border, what are the real causes for people immigrating to the United States, that seems to fall by the wayside, and all the focus is on border security, border enforcement, and basically painting with a broad brush that all of these people are criminals, dangerous, and making the border an unsafe place to live. That is totally false, as we know.
Can I respond?
And I was going to call on other colleagues to also respond.
And again, those issues have to be addressed at the national level. We have a Congress and a presidency that can't talk to one another and recognize the seriousness of this problem and come together. I would ask the media to continue to ask the question, what do you agree on? And what do you disagree on as it relates to how to fix this problem? That I haven't seen in the media. And given the fact that you have a First Amendment right that sometimes is trying to be taken away, but that's a different story, you should be asking the question, what do you agree on? We know what the problem is. What are the fixes to the problem? And then see exactly what direction we go in as opposed to continuing this divisiveness. The president is supposed to lead this country. And the problem is that he's not leading like he should be, and he's not being checked by the Senate. And that must be done. The senators should make certain that we come up with the issues number one, and number two, what they can agree to do.
I mean, if things, how bad do things have to be in their home country where a mother's going to pick up an infant child and her minor children to walk thousands of miles from Central America through Mexico, having to deal with smugglers, traffickers and all these other things to possibly get to the border and risk their life crossing the river, being in the back of an 18-wheeler, possibly dying, suffocating like many have. How bad must it be? So why don't we as a country focus on the root cause of why people are risking their lives and their children's lives? Because how many times have we heard the reports of the folks saying at the border, had I known it was going to be this bad when I got here, I wouldn't have come. They're coming because they think that things are so bad back home, there is no hope back home that they will risk their life. And so the solution is what Senator Johnson said. Why are we stopping the aid to these Central American countries? You know, we know that, I think the solution, we know what the solution is, but sometimes it feels to me like the border and this humanitarian crisis and these immigrants make for good political fodder.
And if I might say, I don't think there's any reality to the notion that Democrats are for open borders. I've never heard any Democrat talk about an open border being a good idea. So that's not a split. There is agreement. If you're asking, is there any agreement? There's agreement that we have to address the border and that we have to have secure borders. But as Senator Menendez was saying, let's see if there's an area of agreement on the economics. I mean, Republicans profess to be conservative with their money, but we're talking about building a very, very, very expensive border wall. We're dumping tons and tons of money, state money, federal money, at the border. What's our return on that investment? I don't know what we could buy every family in Nicaragua for this amount of money, and I'm not suggesting that we do. But when we're looking at the scale of dollars there, let's think about how we spend it. And I don't think that the rhetoric that we've been hearing has any regard for the fiscally effective means of spending our money at the border. And I think if we could have a serious conversation, we might get down to that discussion.
The Lieutenant Governor has cited Border Patrol numbers that show the number of deaths along the border being about 1,600, 1,700. What is Congress doing to address that part of it? They say they need the President to do this emergency declaration to address that. How should Congress be addressing that problem?
That's a great question. You're right. As people risk their lives, there have been over the years and continue to be deaths. A few months ago now, I led a delegation out to New Mexico, and we retraced the area where a young migrant had died. And the recommendations we came back with had to do with the fact that Border Patrol is not adequately resourced, trained, or supplied to treat either migrants or their own agents, CBP agents, who get into trouble while they're in medical trouble while they're working. So the first thing is that there's got to be a commitment of resources, I would say away from a wall and towards better preparation and training to deal with those situations. Now, when you ask the question, what can these government agencies do? Immediately, that's one of them. I mean, they were missing some very basic things to treat people that got into very dire medical situations. Go ahead.
I also think that the climate has created this reality. So because, for example, in El Paso, migrants can't come in and ask for asylum, something that they should be able to do, they then have to go to more dangerous areas to try to get across, right? And so what the policies and the procedures that we have created have really actually encouraged more undocumented immigration than people following the asylum process.
Is that pushing them out away from?
Right. So, for example, that's absolutely. So, if you're telling, if migrants are being kept on the bridge in El Paso for weeks at a time, and at some point that tension breaks, and so the only places to do is to cross are the more dangerous places, the places where you risk your lives more. And while this is at its height right now, this has been an experience for migrants for over a decade. I mean, there have been advocacy groups that have talked about migrant deaths in these dangerous locations because of our failed immigration policies.
All right, well, it's almost 3:30, so unless there's any other questions, thank you all very much. If somebody wants to interview individuals, you're welcome to do so. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, very good. Super job. Good job, yeah.
Senator Hinojosa wasn't named to the budget
Right.
committees. We've reached out to the Lieutenant Governor's office about that, but there's no Democrat who has
Right, I know.
Do you know why that is?
I don't know. As you could tell, we were on the Senate floor, and upon adjournment.
Whoops, sorry, I'm just trying to get out of the picture.
We're taking votes, so I wasn't able to go and check with either the Lieutenant Governor or Jay Nelson or with Senator Menendez. But I am very disappointed that we don't have a Democrat on the conference committee. It's the first time in many, many years. And it seems to me then that we're not providing at least some balance there. I mean, even though it's only one, you know, it helps to have that representation. You know, after all, you know, we're 12 senators representing millions of people, and we don't have any voice on the major committee at the end of session.
Will you be formally asking for that, for an explanation? Personally, what's your next step? Is there a way to-
Well, I do intend to ask Chairwoman Nelson what happened here. I noticed that she did appoint Senator Hinojosa to the supplemental, you know, budget committee, but not the final Senate House conference committee that Senator Hinojosa has served on for a long time. He still is the vice chair of finance, and so. But I can't answer your question as to what happened there. I was taken aback by that. I wasn't expecting that.
Please reach out to them, so.
All right.
Let me know if you.
I will let you know if I hear anything different. Thank you. Jenna. Yeah, I think we better do that. Oh, you're shaking your head, no? Not a good idea. Yeah, okay. All right. I just a little more, I gotta get to some other meeting. What's going on? Huh? I should. How you doing? The last one. Myself, you can call me anytime. You know, okay, I guess they're gonna stay with you.